flooded the world with money. We have created huge amounts of deficits. And looking back, and also I was saying that also in between, we may have overspent to fight the crisis and now have created the basis for new problems. We have not solved in as promised, 2008, many structural reforms and control measures like recapitalization of the banks. We have not created bad banks. We have no transnational monetary supervisory councils and many other things. In Germany, for instance, we have not restructured the public banking sector. From overspending comes now fiscal instability and also a potential threat of inflation, which emerging countries already can talk about. And we create currently, on the basis of many monetary policies, the potential for inflation. And also we create problems for the private sector who lacks money. So, and we also know that inflation, in particular also India knows that inflation endangers growth. Now, the recovery here and there, for instance, in Germany, may look like a miracle, but it isn't. The German recovery is based on the luck that only our brightest industries were affected by the crisis, so only the export-oriented industries were affected by the crisis, so we could easily recover there. And also we had undertaken for a decade strong reforms within companies, but also in the economy to reform labor markets and social security systems. So that's certainly part of an explanation what has happened there, but also it's part of maybe a hint which can help other countries to prepare for the next crisis. On the other hand, we have to see that central banks now helping fiscal authorities to finance public debt, well, of course, fuel at least the potential for inflation worldwide. Now, the G20 is, so to speak, the daughter of the big crisis. The G20 is the right place for debating and negotiating global fiscal stabilization and global reform measures. The G20 represent about 90% of global GDP, 80% of international trade, and about 2/3 of the global population. And the big states, Brazil, India, and China, have begun to play a much stronger role in the determination of policies of the economic world. And this is very much welcome to balance the global debate. And I would like to stress that we on many issues, we are sitting all in the same boat, and we have to solve issues like global growth, global employment, and the control of climate change together. Now, the macro challenges of the emerging economies at the moment look a little bit alike. There is strong growth, that's why these countries are called emerging economies, but also there is the fight with inflation, and certainly it is a big challenge to fight inflation, because this could have negative effects on the economic growth of the particular countries. The emerging countries need to control inflation since it would harm growth. Strict monetary policies are needed to fight core inflation. Core inflation will be fueled by inflation policies in advanced economies, and so we better all have to be prepared. Now, at the moment, we talk so much in Europe and worldwide about the euro crisis and the future of the euro. The euro has been a very stable currency. In my view, what we see is not a euro crisis, but a crisis of European government fiscal policies. What would have been from the beginning was strong economic reforms and fiscal stabilization. In particular, when I said that nearly 2 years ago, restructuring of the public debt let's say in Greece and in other countries, with a haircut to involve private business, in particular German and French banks. The reform of the Maastricht Treaty to impose strict fiscal constraints in the future, and strong labor market reforms and reforms of the social security systems, in particular to impose workfare measures and to increase the retirement age. So all these issues would have been useful and are useful to fight the crisis, and will bring back a basis of confidence of the international markets. Now, in terms of debt to GDP ratios, we have seen an unprecedented rise in many advanced economies. If you look at the 5 states which are top with debt to GDP ratios, we find the UK, the United States, and Japan on top. This is another indication that we do not see an euro crisis as such. We see a fiscal stability problem. To blame the Eurozone to be the core of the perceived sovereign debt crisis would be a serious mistake. Neither the US, nor Japan, nor the UK have solved their fiscal stabilization problem. Also, the emerging countries like India and Brazil have debt to GDP rates far below 70%. This is still above, but not so much above the 60% Maastricht goal. The situation would have been substantially better also in the big countries if these countries would have followed the 3% deficit rule of the Maastricht Treaty since 2000. This all requires disciplined global fiscal consolidation plans and efforts, which are, however, supposed to come now at the wrong time, with the economic recovery being fragile. Against this background, we call for a global debt break following the German example. This was recently agreed on an EU Council. Debt breaks helped to consolidate budgets easier. The agreement on the debt break should be binding and hence be fixed in national constitutions and monitored by independent transnational fiscal councils. So it's not only the country alone, it's the whole global community which is observing the policies. That's the idea. The fiscal councils should be located at the IMF and at the European Stability Mechanism, for instance, and should conduct a regular evaluation of national budget plans. A global debt break in combination with an independent transnational supervisory council would send a credible signal that the reduction of sovereign debt to sustainable levels is not further delayed into the future. A new fiscal policy framework thus leaves enough room for discretionary fiscal policy and the workings of automatic stabilizers in an economic downturn. So why should the emerging economies care? Well, you should care because, all the global growth also is interacting with your growth. We also would have a problem with foreign aid maybe in the future if the advanced societies are running out of government money. And you can help, especially in the G20, to force and push for transnational agreements that can help to impose and to stabilize fiscal policies. So, from the macro point of view, fight inflation, impose fiscal stabilization, and also introduce and strengthen automatic stabilizers by building up social security systems would be wise. Now, my last point is about how to foster future growth and employment policies. Here I would argue that in the future it's very important to take the labor markets into account and help to create growth by pushing employment and pushing employment through education. We have heard about already overall the importance of training, especially of the young. Here also the German model may helpful. We have a very low youth unemployment rate because we send people to school and to companies at the same time to learn how to deal with the real world. And the other issue, I think, what is very important, what we have to do in the future is to push for labor policies that impose the workfare principle, only subsidies and help if people are willing to work for it. That's a basic core principle. And last but not least, we need more national and globally mobility, especially of the high-skilled. The resources for growth in the future will be the high-skilled. We already have seen that China, for instance, has started a very ambitious long-term human capital program aiming at being the world market leader for human capital in 2050. This may sound far away, but I think it's a very important challenge for all parts of the world, and the solution is not competition so much, it's the sharing of the most precious resource we have. These are human beings, and so I argue that free mobility, free labor mobility for high-skilled people globally, maybe on the G20 level, would be an idea to help to use this resource better, more efficiently, and also leave the real decisions where to work and where to contribute to growth to the people themselves. So that's basically what I wanted to argue for. So at the macro level, we should look at fiscal stabilization, on global agreements and control. We have to fight inflation. We have to push for automatic stabilizers. And at the micro level, there should be a focus on jobs and workfare. We have to foster training on the job of young people. We have to encourage mobility globally to mobilize the human capital, and we have to also, I think, invest in students worldwide and in student mobility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zimmerman, for bringing out the factors that we need to look at in the emerging scenario. May I now request Mr. Professor Kishore Mubani to make his comments. As you all know, he is professor in the practice of public policy and the dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I realized that I have a challenge on my hands. I'm the sixth speaker on this podium. To be the sixth speaker, it's a bit like being the sixth husband of Elizabeth Taylor on the wedding night. You know what you're supposed to do, but you're not sure whether you can make it interesting. So to make it interesting, what I might try to do is to take advantage of the fact that I'm not a professional economist and challenge some of the conventional wisdom in this field. And I believe that the reason why we need to do this is because the world is changing so dramatically. Things that we thought were unthinkable are happening, and therefore we have no choice. If we want to prepare for a different world that is coming, we have to start thinking the unthinkable. And I'm going to suggest that we can think the unthinkable by questioning some of the fundamental assumptions that exist in our minds about how the global economy runs and how it's going to affect us. So the first assumption that I'd like to question is this assumption that in one way or another, the sort of broad global macroeconomic stability that we got used to in the last 50 to 60 years will carry on. And why do I say we should question that assumption? Because in the last 50 to 60 years, the global economy was in one way or another managed, and managed quite well, by the United States and the European Union, who, because they believed they had the most competitive economies in the world, were happy to manage the global economy and keep it going at a relatively steady pace through competent economic management. But what happens when competent Western economic management is replaced by incompetent Western economic management? And unfortunately, this may have been a hypothetical scenario, but the hypothetical scenario has happened. And if you look at what's happening in the Eurozone, as you lurch from one EU summit of crisis to another EU summit of crisis, you begin to wonder, can the Europeans do it? And believe me, if we were speaking at this economics conclave a year ago, and if anyone had come to this podium and said, hey, the euro may crash within a year, you would have said, ha, no way. The Europeans know how to do it. But today, the sheer fact that markets worry day by day what's going to happen to the euro show how far we have come. Now, we've already seen the problems with the euro. Let me suggest something even more unthinkable. Right now in India, you're worried about the rupee depreciating against the dollar. But what happens if the dollar, which is after all, the great pillar of stability in the world, suddenly begins to become shaken up in one way or another? And we got to